It was 1:47 in the morning when an elderly woman climbed into my back seat, looked at the photograph taped to my dashboard, and said something that made me forget I was holding a half-empty cup of coffee. "Is that Robert Webb?" I was parked outside Swedish Medical Center on First Hill, February in Seattle, which means the rain wasn't falling so much as existing, a fine gray mist that made the streetlights look like they were melting. I'd been driving since 4 in the afternoon. My back had stopped hurting around 10 and moved into a kind of resigned numbness, and sitting on my dashboard, taped between the air freshener and the phone mount, was a photograph of my father and me at the Pike Place Market, taken in the summer of 1994. I'm 12 in the picture. He's 38. We're both squinting into the sun with the particular grin of two people who have absolutely nowhere else they need to be. The woman who'd just gotten into my back seat was somewhere in her mid-70s, small, white-haired, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose knees had opinions about stairs. She'd been discharged from the hospital at some point and was headed to an assisted living facility in Magnolia. She'd barely settled before she leaned forward, studied the photograph, and asked her question. "That's my dad," I said. "He passed away in '99. She was quiet for a long moment, then, "What's your name?" Nolan Webb." She sat back in her seat. When I glanced at the rearview mirror, she had both hands pressed flat against her thighs, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has just watched a piece of something very large fall very precisely into place. "My name is Evelyn Strauss," she said. "I worked for 22 years as a legal secretary at a firm in Bellevue. Your father's estate went through our office when he passed. I spent 3 months with his file." She paused. "There's a trust, Nolan. There has been since 1999. I don't think anyone ever found you." I almost pulled over. I didn't, because I was on Seneca Street at 2 in the morning in the rain, and pulling over on Seneca in February is how you end up sideways into a metro bus. But my hands went stiff on the wheel, and whatever I was about to say dissolved before it reached my mouth. "A trust," I said finally. "Your father co-founded a company," she said, "Webb and Theus Engineering Solutions. He owned half. When he died, his half went into trust for you." My father, Robert Webb, died in March of 1999 from a brain aneurysm. He was 43 years old. I was 19 3 months into my freshman year at the University of Washington, and I got the call on a Tuesday morning while standing in the hallway outside my dorm room. I flew home to Spokane. I stood at his funeral in a suit that didn't fit and looked at the faces of people who'd known him and felt, above everything else, the specific bewilderment of a person who has lost something they hadn't yet finished understanding. My father had become what lost parents become, a voice I couldn't quite hear anymore, a way of laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them, a photograph on a dashboard that I kept because the image of him grinning in the summer light was the truest picture I had of who he was. And now, 25 years later, a woman in the back of my Honda Civic was telling me he'd left something in a filing cabinet that no one had ever shown me. "What's it worth?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She told me what she knew, which was not a number but a direction, the name of the trust firm in Bellevue, the attorney who'd been managing it since the early 2000s. "I don't know the current valuation," she said, "but the company has done very well. I know that from the industry news. I used to follow it after your father's case. I always wondered if anyone ever told you." I drove her to Magnolia in near silence. When she got out, she pressed her card into my hand through the window. It had a number written on the back in ballpoint pen. "That's the firm," she said. "Call them in the morning. Tell them who you are." I sat in the parking lot of her facility for 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the dash. The rain kept doing its thing. The photograph of my father kept looking at me. Then I drove back downtown and picked up a fare going to Capitol Hill and didn't sleep until sunrise. But before I tell you what I found when I made that call, before I tell you about the trust and the attorney and the number that I stared at until it stopped looking like a mistake, I need to tell you how I ended up driving strangers around Seattle at 2 in the morning at the age of 42. Because the amount in that filing cabinet is nothing without the context of what I'd lost to get there. My name is Nolan Webb. 18 months ago, I was a licensed structural engineer and senior partner at one of the most respected mid-size engineering firms in the Pacific Northwest. I had a reputation for solving problems other engineers walked away from. I had a house in Ballard, a son named Finn who was 9 years old and thought I hung the moon, and a marriage that I believed was solid because I hadn't yet learned the difference between solid and undisturbed. I started at Farr & Associates fresh out of my master's program at the University of Washington. The founder, Duncan Farr, was 53 when I joined, already regarded as the kind of civil engineer that younger engineers pointed to when they talked about what the field could look like. He mentored me. He gave me latitude on projects that senior engineers twice my age would have been grateful to touch. By 35, I was lead engineer on a major transit infrastructure project for King County. By 38, I was a named partner. I was good at the job not because I was the smartest person in the room. Duncan was probably smarter on a technical level, but because I listened to what the project actually needed rather than what was easiest to deliver. Clients noticed. Contracts followed. In 14 years at that firm, I helped bring in over $300 million in project work. I met my wife, Cassandra, at an industry conference in Portland in 2010. She was in project management for a development company, sharp and organized, and the kind of person who could read a room for its power structure in under 5 minutes. We married in 2012. Finn came in 2014. We bought a house in Ballard with a covered porch and a view of the Sound on clear days, and I told myself we had built something that would hold. The first time I noticed something was wrong was in the spring of 2022. Cassandra started referencing Duncan in ways that felt off-tempo, not frequently, just often enough that I noticed the frequency. Duncan's opinion on the East Side project. Duncan's take on where the market was going. The way she said his name carried a kind of familiarity that didn't match the few times they'd actually been in the same room. I told myself I was reading into things, I was busy, I was probably projecting. In October of 2022, I found a dinner receipt in her coat pocket, a restaurant in South Lake Union that I'd suggested we try 6 months earlier and she'd said was too expensive. The table had been for 2. The date was a Tuesday. I'd worked until 9. I confronted her that night. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea and looked at me with the specific calm of a woman who had already arrived somewhere and was waiting for me to catch up. I want a divorce, Nolan. How long has this been going on? 8 months. With Duncan. Yes. I stood in my own kitchen and tried to find something to say that wasn't just the echo of the worst word I knew. He's 57 years old, Cassandra. I know how old he is. He's my boss. He was your boss, she said, and was landed before it should have. The divorce was filed by December. Cassandra hired a firm that specialized in high-asset divorce proceedings, the kind of firm that charges rates most people only see in movies. Duncan had referred them to her. The house had been purchased with a down payment that included money from a refinancing Duncan had helped me arrange 3 years earlier, which meant there was a financial thread connecting him to the property. By the time the settlement closed in February of 2023, I had approximately $60,000, my tools, my truck, and every book I owned. $60,000 in my professional reputation. The reputation lasted 4 months. In June of 2023, I was terminated from Farr & Associates, not a layoff, not a restructuring, a termination for cause. The documentation cited a pattern of insubordination and 2 incidents of alleged project misrepresentation, which was a clean way of saying that someone had manufactured a paper trail suggesting I had falsified structural load calculations on a commercial building project in 2021. In the engineering world, that is not a nuance. That is a career-ending accusation. It can mean licensing suspension. It can mean criminal exposure. It touches everything. I hired an attorney immediately. She told me the documentation was thin, that the allegations were likely survivable in a licensing review, but that litigation against Duncan would be expensive, slow, and uncertain, and that I would need to find income in the meantime. I started applying to every engineering firm in the region, Jacobs WSP, Tetra Tech, KPFF, smaller boutique firms, firms in Portland, firms in Spokane. Nobody called back. By September, I understood why. My former colleague, an older engineer named Bernard, who still occasionally met me for coffee at a diner near the University District, told me over eggs what he'd heard through the professional network. Duncan called the principals at every major firm in the state. He told them you falsified calculations on a structural project. He told them bringing you on would expose them to liability and jeopardize their relationship with his firm. Bernard looked at his plate. Duncan's firm is the reference on half the public infrastructure work in King County, Nolan. Nobody's going to risk that. Not for you, I'm sorry. It's not true, I said. The calculations were accurate. I can prove it. I know that. It doesn't matter from where they're standing. By January of 2024, the $60,000 was most of the way gone. I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Rainier Beach for $800 a month. I picked up Finn every other weekend, drove him in my truck to the park or the Children's Museum or wherever he wanted to go, and tried not to let him see that his father was applying for work at structural inspection companies and getting no response. In March, I started driving for a rideshare platform. The sign-up took 40 minutes. The background check cleared in 2 days. Nobody asked about load calculations. Finn was 10 by then. He was old enough to understand that the situation had changed, if not the specific mechanics of why. The first time he got into my Civic instead of my truck, he looked around at the interior and the phone mount and the air freshener shaped like a pine tree and said, "Dad, I like your car." I told him thanks. He reached over and touched the photograph of his grandfather on the dashboard and said, "Is that you when you were little?" And I told him yes, that was me. And that was his grandfather Robert, who he never got to meet. He looks like you, Finn said. I hope so, I told him. Cassandra texted me in August of 2023, 5 words. Enjoy the new chapter, Nolan. She included a thumbs up emoji, a thumbs up. As though the deliberate destruction of my career and the erasure of the life I had spent 14 years building was the kind of thing that warranted encouragement, the kind of send-off you give someone leaving a job they chose to leave. I read it twice in the parking lot of a grocery store, and then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home and didn't look at it again until morning. That was my life for 7 months. Driving, picking up Finn, reading through old project files at night, looking for documentation that might support my case, trying to stay steady enough that my son didn't notice how not steady I was. And then it was a Tuesday night in February, and I picked up an elderly woman outside a hospital, and she looked at a photograph on my dashboard and asked me a question that changed the direction of everything. I called the trust firm in Bellevue the next morning. The attorney managing the account was a man named Forsyth, who had been overseeing it since he took over from the original attorney in 2006. He had a particular tone on the phone, professionally measured in the way of a person who is sitting on information and is choosing his words with care. Mr. Webb, yes, the Robert Allen Webb Trust. I've been managing this account for nearly 20 years. I have to tell you that I made multiple attempts to contact you over the years. The correspondence was returned, and the address we had was a property in Spokane that had changed hands twice. What does the trust contain? He walked me through it. My father and his business partner, Oscar Theus, had co-founded Webb & Theus Engineering Solutions in 1991 with matching capital contributions, equal partners, equal ownership. In 1993, the company had patented a structural reinforcement system for bridge and overpass retrofitting that was licensed to construction contractors across the Pacific Northwest, then nationally. The original patent had since expired, but the company's continued development of the system had produced a portfolio of 12 subsequent patents, all still generating licensing revenue. And my father's shares. Transferred to the Robert Allen Webb Trust upon his death in 1999, 50% of the company held in trust for his named beneficiary. That's you, Mr. Webb. What is the company currently worth? He said a number. I wrote it on the back of an envelope I had on the kitchen counter. The total valuation of Webb & Theus Engineering Solutions as of the most recent independent assessment was $162 million. My 50% came to $81 million. I sat on the floor of my kitchen. I don't mean I pulled out a chair. I mean I went from standing to sitting on linoleum in a way I didn't exactly plan, with the envelope in one hand and the pen in the other, and the number in my own handwriting staring back at me in a way that felt less like information and more like an accusation. $81 million. I had been driving strangers through a Seattle rain for $11 an hour, and I was the 50% owner of a company worth $162 million. Forsyth was still on the line. Mr. Webb, are you still there? I'm here, I said. I need to verify this independently, all of it. Of course, I'll send you everything I have, 25 years of annual statements, the trust documents, the original corporate charter. He paused. Your father was very deliberate in how he set this up. He wanted it to be yours when you were ready for it. When you were ready for it. My father was 25 years dead, and he was still managing to say the right thing. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time, and then I did something I hadn't done since I stood in a cemetery in Spokane in a suit that didn't fit and watched them lower Robert Webb into the ground. I cried. Not for the money, not for the number on the envelope. For my father, who died at 43 with a company he'd built and a 19-year-old son he didn't have time to tell about it. For the man I remembered mostly in pieces, the way he explained things by drawing diagrams on napkins, the specific way he shifted gears when he drove, the arm around my shoulder in a photograph on a dashboard, a man I had never fully known because I had still been in the process of learning him when he was taken. I hired an attorney within the week. Her name was Patricia, but that name's taken. Her name was Simone Aldrich, a partner at a Seattle firm that handled estate law and corporate transitions. She reviewed every document Forsyth sent, cross-referenced the trust with the corporate charter, requested an updated independent valuation. 2 weeks later, she called me. Nolan, your ownership is clear, documented, and uncontestable. You've been the 50% co-owner of this company since your father died. Nothing about your current circumstances changes that. What are my options? You can sell your shares to Oscar Theus if he's able and willing to buy. You can force a buyout by the company, which would require liquidating assets. Or you can step into your role as co-owner and participate in running the company going forward. What does Oscar want? She smiled. I could hear it. He's been looking for you for 3 years. I think you know what he wants. I met Oscar Theus the following week at a coffee shop in Fremont. He was 74 years old, solid-built and gray-bearded, with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on like he couldn't decide if he needed them. He ordered black coffee and shook my hand with the grip of a man who had been waiting a long time to do exactly that. "You look like him," he said. "Same jawline, same way of holding your shoulders." "I've been told that." "Your father was the better engineer," Oscar said. "I'll tell you that straight. He understood loads the way some people understand music, not by calculation alone, but by feel. He'd walk a site and know something was off before he'd run a single number. I never had that. What I had was the operational side, the client relationships, the business. We fit." He looked at his coffee cup. "When he died, I kept building because I didn't know what else to do, but the company was always half his. I've known that every day for 25 years. I need it to be half yours now." We talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, I had agreed to begin an active role in the company, not a figurehead position, not a title on a door. I would learn the portfolio of patents, the licensing structure, the active contracts, the way the business actually worked, from the ground up. The same way I'd learned everything else in my career, by showing up and paying attention. I started in April. Oscar was patient. He walked me through every licensing agreement, every client relationship, every pending project bid. The company was lean and effective, 22 full-time staff, a network of contractors, and a reputation for delivering exactly what they promised on structural retrofitting projects throughout the West Coast. In the files alongside the business records, Oscar kept a set of original engineering notebooks. My father's handwriting, careful and forward-leaning, filling page after page with sketches and stress calculations and notes in the margins. He handed them to me on my 3rd week. "I've been keeping these for you," he said. "I didn't know when I'd be able to give them to you, but I knew they should be yours." I took the notebooks home and read them at the kitchen table until 1 in the morning. My father had written in the margins the way smart people talk to themselves. Observations, questions, tangents. And near the back of the second notebook, on a page dated July 1995, I found a line that wasn't a calculation or a technical note. It was addressed to no one, or maybe to me specifically, written in the past tense the way engineers sometimes draft instructions they mean to be found later. For Nolan when he's ready to see what he's made of. I was 42 years old, sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment in Rainier Beach, and my dead father was still managing to gut me with 7 words. The moment I hadn't planned for arrived in September of last year. Webb and Thies submitted a bid on a pedestrian bridge project at the new waterfront development on Seattle's central waterfront, a highly visible, well-funded infrastructure project, the kind of contract that matters for a company's reputation regardless of the dollar figure. We submitted a bid of $4.8 million. The competing bid was submitted by Farr & Associates, Duncan Farr, $4.6 million. We won. The selection committee cited our patent portfolio and technical track record with similar structures. When Farr & Associates researched the winning firm, which Duncan's team always did because that's the kind of operation he ran, they found the corporate documents, Webb and Thies Engineering Solutions, co-owned by Oscar Thies and Nolan Webb, the same Nolan Webb that Duncan had fired, fabricated a paper trail against, and spent 2 years ensuring couldn't get hired anywhere in the state. I know what happened in Duncan's office that afternoon because Bernard texted me, "Did you just beat Farr on the waterfront bridge?" His acquisitions guy just called me asking questions. "Whatever you did, I'm proud of you." Cassandra called me 3 days later, first time she'd initiated contact since the thumbs-up text. "Nolan." "Cassandra. Is it true about the company?" "Which part?" "That you co-own some engineering firm, that you outbid Duncan on the waterfront project." Webb and Thies Engineering Solutions. My father co-founded it in 1991. I inherited his shares. I let a moment pass. I've owned half the company for 25 years. I just didn't know. The silence on her end lasted long enough to be its own answer. It was the silence of a woman recalculating, and the unit of measurement she was working in had never been anything except money. "Nolan, You texted me enjoy the new chapter with a thumbs up," I said, while I was driving Uber to pay rent on an $800 apartment, while I was picking up Finn in a Honda Civic because you and Duncan were in a Belltown condo with 2 parking spaces and a doorman. You sent me a thumbs up like the end of my career was a thing you were cheerfully aware of. I stopped. "I'm not calling to argue. I'm telling you that Duncan didn't break me. The blacklist didn't break me. Driving at 2 in the morning didn't break me. You tried to make me someone who could be disposed of, and it turns out I was never that person. I just didn't know exactly who I was yet." She didn't say anything for a moment, then I didn't mean it to be cruel. "I know, that's almost worse." I told her I'd pick up Finn on Friday and hung up. The custody modification was filed in October. Simone handled it, changed circumstances, substantial asset ownership, professional re-engagement, stable housing. The court reviewed the filing and awarded 50-50 custody beginning in November. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Queen Anne, 4th floor, good light, half a mile from an elementary school with a strong STEM program. Finn has his own room. He put a poster of a suspension bridge on the wall because he's been interested in structural engineering since I told him what his grandfather did for a living. The first night he slept there, he walked through the apartment and looked at everything, and then sat down on his bed and said, "Dad, you seem different." Different how? He thought about it the way 10-year-olds think about things, not carefully, but honestly, like you put something down that was really heavy, and you're standing up straight now. I looked at my son, this kid who had spent 2 years watching his father move through a diminished version of his life, and had been kind enough not to say it out loud until I could actually hear it. "Yeah," I said, "I think that's right." "Can we order dinner?" "Whatever you want." "Not pizza, though, I don't like that place." "We can order literally anything else." It's March now. The pedestrian bridge project broke ground last month. I was there in a hard hat with site plans under my arm, standing on the waterfront in the gray Pacific Northwest light with Oscar beside me watching the ceremonial first dig. My father's engineering notebooks were in the bag on my shoulder. I carry them everywhere now, read them on lunch breaks and late evenings, learning to hear his voice in the technical language he left behind. "Thomas Grant Beckett would be proud," Oscar said, except he said Robert and he meant my father. He said Robert would be proud. I hope so. "Stop hoping," Oscar told me. "Look where you're standing. After everything, the firing, the blacklist, the driving, the apartment, the divorce, the thumbs-up text, you're standing at a groundbreaking for a project your father's company won. That is not luck, Nolan. That's the man your father made you, whether he had time to show you or not. He left you the stubbornness to keep going when everything says stop. The money is just what was sitting in the same place." I think about Cassandra's text sometimes, 5 words and a thumbs up. I think about it the way you think about a diagnosis you survived, not constantly, not with fear, just with the particular awareness of someone who knows exactly how close it got. She was wrong when she sent it. She was wrong before she sent it. She was wrong when I was filling up my Civic on a debit card with $12 left on it. Wrong when I was hauling strangers to the airport at midnight. Wrong when I was sitting on a kitchen floor with an envelope and a number I couldn't make sense of. Wrong, most fundamentally, because she had confused what I was doing with who I was, and those two things had never been the same. My father died when I was 19. I'm 42 now, and for most of those years I carried him as an absence, a photograph, a warmth that had no name on it. I didn't know he'd left me half a company. I didn't know his handwriting was in a series of notebooks waiting on a shelf in Fremont for me to find it. I didn't know that his name was on patents generating licensing revenue across the country while I was being told I had no place in the industry that was his life's work. But I know now. I'm standing on a waterfront in the city where he built something, and I have his notebooks in my bag, and his name is back on the door in a way that means something. The Uber app is still on my phone. I keep it there. Some nights I think about deleting it, and some nights I think about what it felt like to drive through a Seattle rain at 2 a.m, exhausted and invisible, and have an elderly woman look at a photograph and ask a question that returned me to myself. Nobody is nobody. The guy in the Honda Civic is somebody's son. The person reading a thumbs-up text in a grocery store parking lot is carrying something the sender can't see and can't touch. Sometimes that something is $81 million in a trust that's been waiting 25 years. And sometimes it's just your father's handwriting on a page, telling you he always believed you'd be ready. Either way, it's enough to keep standing. If this story hit something real for you, hit the like button and drop a comment below. I read every single one, and if you know someone who's been told they're nobody by a divorce, a firing, a text, a silence, share this with them. Tell them what an old woman in the back of a Civic told me at 2 a.m. in the rain. The door you're about to knock on might be the one that changes everything. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you there.